I didn't raise my voice when the HOA board marched into my kitchen waving papers they claimed were eviction notices. I didn't flinch when their president, a woman named Margaret Maggie Thornwell, smirked and called me squatter in front of my own farmhouse. I just slid one faded piece of parchment across the table, a 1923 water rights deed signed in fountain pen ink, and watched their smug faces crumble. What they didn't know, they'd built $35 million McMansions downstream of my grandfather's dam, and today I was going to let nature itself teach them what floodplain really meant. My name's Ethan Cole, 40 years old, third-generation Texan, and reluctant landowner of 72 acres of rolling pasture just outside of Austin. I never asked to be here. Truth is, I thought I'd left all this behind when I enlisted, when I swore I'd never come back to the cracked porch of my grandfather's house. But life has a way of circling back. Granddad, we called him Pops, had been more than a farmer. He was an engineer at heart, the kind who measured creek flow by eye and still beat the state's hydrologists. In 1979, long before luxury subdivisions and golf carts arrived, Pops built a small earth dam across Willow Creek. Nothing fancy, just packed clay, a few spillway gates, and a dream to hold enough water for cattle and for the neighbors during drought. It wasn't just a pond. It was lifeblood. When I was a kid, Pops would drive me out in his rusted Ford pickup at dawn. We'd sit by the spillway, coffee steaming, in his thermos, and he'd say, "Ethan, water's the only thing men will kill for without thinking. Guard it, boy. Respect it. It doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." I never forgot that. 2 decades later, after 2 tours overseas, with the Army Corps of Engineers, I returned home to Pop's land. Only Pops was gone, passed during my second deployment, and the farmhouse sat empty, creaking in the Texas wind. I wanted peace. I wanted space for my daughter, Lily, to grow without the shadows of my wife's grave illness still clinging to our city life. But instead of peace, I found survey stakes and bulldozers chewing into my back 40. Bright orange tape fluttered where my grandfather's hayfields had once stretched. Concrete trucks idled in line, and a billboard announced Willowbrook Estates, luxury lakeside living, starting at $900,000. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, so I marched down the gravel road, dust on my boots, and demanded answers from the foreman. He barely glanced at me. "Got permits and everything. This is HOA property now." That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and the soft electric whir of a golf cart. Margaret Maggie Thornwell stepped out like she was dismounting a throne. Blonde hair too perfect for the Texas sun, tennis whites that probably cost more than my entire month's groceries, and a smile that smelled like entitlement. "Mr. Cole, is it?" she asked, not waiting for me to confirm. "So glad you're back. We've taken the liberty of putting your grandfather's old land to better use. Community needs growth after all." "This is my family's property," I snapped. "You're trespassing." Her smile sharpened. "Actually, while you were gone, this parcel fell under adverse possession. You weren't here, Mr. Cole. We've been improving it, which means, by law, it's ours now." She handed me a glossy HOA packet, the kind with gold lettering. On the back page was a bill $85,000 in community fines and assessments. "You can pay or you can move along," she said sweetly, stepping back into her golf cart. "This is Willowbrook Estates now." That night, sitting in Pops's dusty kitchen, I pulled out every file box he'd left me. Tax records, dam inspection reports, Army Corps correspondence. Most people would have been overwhelmed. But I'd spent 2 tours building water infrastructure in war zones, canals, dams, desalination plants. I knew one truth: paperwork wins wars just as often as bullets do, and buried beneath layers of yellowed receipts and handwritten notes, I found it. 1979 federal dam permit stamped by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 1923 water rights deed, granting my great-grandfather senior use of Willow Creek in perpetuity. These weren't just papers. They were weapons. Because here's the thing about Texas. Water rights are older and harder to steal than oil rights. And Pops's dam, built under federal oversight, meant federal jurisdiction. Something no HOA, no smug councilman husband could override. I smiled for the first time in months. Let them build. Let them pour concrete foundations into a 100-year floodplain. Nature, with a little help, was about to balance the books. It started small, a bright yellow slip taped to my door. Unapproved structure, $250 fine. The structure in question? Pops's barn, built in 1962. 2 days later, another notice. Unsightly yard, $300 fine. Apparently, wildflowers blooming along my fence line weren't HOA-approved landscaping. By week's end, I had 7 separate violations totaling over $2,800, each one signed with Maggie's looping cursive. I wasn't even officially in their HOA, yet they acted like I was. Their logic? Community improvement requires uniform enforcement. The worst was when my daughter, Lily, came home from school in tears. "Dad," she whispered, "they said we don't belong here, that we're squatters." Her classmates, parents were HOA loyalists. Maggie had poisoned the well fast. That night, as Lily slept, I sat by Pops's old dam with a flashlight and his journals. Each page spoke of neighbors helped, droughts survived, floods prevented. This wasn't just land, it was legacy, and Maggie Thornwell was trampling it with her designer sneakers. Harassment escalated. County inspectors arrived unannounced, citing me for unsafe septic despite passing inspection 6 months earlier. Animal control knocked, claiming my 2 border collies were dangerous breeds. Fire marshal flagged my wood stove for unpermitted use. Even a wellness check showed up at my door, citing concern for a troubled veteran. I spotted Maggie in her golf cart across the street, sipping Chardonnay and watching as the clipboard army marched through my property. The message was clear: give up or be crushed by paperwork. But she had underestimated one thing. I was trained to operate under siege, whether by Taliban militants or petty suburban tyrants, and I had allies she didn't see coming. First came Mr. Henderson, my neighbor 3 doors down, retired attorney, sharp mind despite his age. He'd fought HOAs before and carried the scars. "Son," he said, sliding a binder across his kitchen table, "Karen Thornwell is running this like a personal fiefdom. Selective enforcement, targeted harassment, even conflicts of interest. With her husband on city council, I've kept records, every violation notice for the last 8 years. Patterns don't lie." Then there was Samuel Washington, a retired banker, one of the few black homeowners in Willowbrook Estates. He'd been fined over $10,000 across the years for lawn height and paint shades, yet his white neighbors with worse violations went untouched. Karen doesn't run an HOA, he told me, eyes hard. She runs a racket, and it's about time someone with backbone stood up to her. Together, the three of us began meeting in secret. Coffee at dawn, whispered conversations, in barns, piecing together the scope of Maggie's empire, and what we found was worse than I imagined. Through Henderson's records and Samuel's banking contacts, we uncovered Maggie's scheme. She used the HOA to bury families in fines until they sold at below-market prices. Those properties were scooped up by shell LLCs connected to her real estate company. Once renovated, she resold them at massive profit. But this time, she had gone bigger. The 35 homes built on Pops's land, they weren't technically HOA owned. They were financed through Rick Thornwell's construction company, her husband's firm, with loans backed by false environmental reports. They'd claimed no floodplain risk and no federal oversight in their insurance applications. Both were lies, which meant one thing. If I could prove Pops's dam and water rights, the entire Willowbrook development could collapse like wet concrete. Maggie struck first. The local newspaper ran a headline, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community, Growth," complete with a photo of me looking like a criminal, taken when I'd just come home from a 14-hour workday fixing fences. HOA newsletters called me a dangerous agitator. Social media posts painted me as unstable, a risk to children's safety. Even my mailbox became a weapon. One morning I found it smashed, tire tracks in the mud. Another time, someone stuffed raw chicken inside, reeking in the Texas heat. Lily grew quiet. She stopped wanting to go outside. And that, more than anything, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just a fight for land. It was a fight for dignity. For family, and Maggie had just declared war. See, here's what Maggie never understood. Water law in Texas runs deeper than HOA bylaws. Prior appropriation, first in time, first in right. Pops's 1923 deed trumped every subdivision permit. Federal jurisdiction. Because the Army Corps helped design his dam, oversight bypassed local boards entirely. Clean Water Act. Diverting Willow Creek without federal clearance was a $50,000 per day fine. I wasn't fighting with anger. I was fighting with law, with engineering, with patience. And soon I would be fighting with water itself. By September, the bulldozers had poured their last foundation. 35 luxury homes gleamed on Pops's back pasture, lined like dominoes along the creek bed. HOA newsletters called it a waterside paradise. I called it a time bomb, because I knew what they didn't. Those homes stood in the path of 100 years of flood history, and Pop's Dam was built with one purpose, to release water safely back into that very channel. The stage was set. I started small, trail cameras, hidden in cedar trees, flow meters installed at 3 points along Willow Creek, photos time-stamped of construction crews illegally diverting the stream. Every detail went into binders thicker than law books. Henderson, my retired attorney neighbor, organized the evidence into legal filings. Samuel, the ex-banker, traced loan documents proving Rick Thornwell's construction company had lied to insurers. And my Army buddy, Tony Riggs, now with the EPA Enforcement Division, confirmed what I suspected. Ethan, Every gallon they've diverted is a separate violation. You've got them cold. Just document it. So I documented. Day after day, night after night. The crunch of gravel under construction boots became my war drum, the low hum of bulldozers my battle hymn, and the whisper of creek water starving, to a trickle my vow of revenge. Word spread quietly. Families tired of Maggie's fines joined us in secret. Maria Gonzalez, mother of 3 foster kids, banned from the pool. James Morris, fined for Christmas lights he'd had for 15 years. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow whose garden withered since the creek diversion. They weren't rebels. They were neighbors. Victims. Together, we formed the Willow Creek Coalition. Not official, not public, but determined, and every story strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about Pops anymore. It was about every person Maggie had bullied into silence. The weather forecast came like prophecy. Heavy rains expected, the kind Pops used to say, fills the dam twice over. My spillway, untouched since 1982, could hold back the surge. But it was designed for one thing above all else, restoring natural flow when fools built downstream. And now 35 fools had paid $900,000 apiece to live right there. Nature was aligning with justice. For 3 nights I worked in secret. Cleared sabotage attempts, where HOA loyalists had tried jamming the hydraulic gates with concrete. Greased gears with Pop's old oil can until they hummed smooth. Ran test releases at 5% flow, watching water carve its old path with ease. Each metallic groan of the dam's levers felt like a war cry. Each rush of water over spillway stones whispered Pop's words. Guard it, boy, respect it. It doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. This wasn't vandalism. It was fulfilling a covenant written into the dam's very permits. Maintain natural seasonal flow patterns in perpetuity. Maggie wasn't blind. She doubled down, parading on morning talk shows, dabbing crocodile tears with silk handkerchiefs. This veteran is threatening our children's homes. He's unstable. He's weaponizing water. Her golf cart patrols became more aggressive, photographing every truck that entered my property. She even staged a protest at my gate, 20 residents with "Protect Our Kids" signs, chanting like I was some domestic terrorist. But what she didn't know? Tony at the EPA had moved up their federal inspection, and Henderson had tipped off Austin reporters hungry for scandal. The day I opened those gates, cameras would roll, not on destruction, but on restoration. That night, storm clouds massed on the horizon. Wind carried the smell of rain, thick and metallic. I stood at the dam controls, flashlight cutting through mist, Pops's journal in my pocket. Inside, his handwriting from 1980, opened spillway today, helped Santos Farm get through drought. That's what neighbors do. Neighbors, community, legacy. I ran my hand across cold steel levers, felt their weight. Tomorrow, those same levers would decide everything. Homes, headlines, history. Behind me, the farmhouse windows glowed where Lily slept peacefully, unaware her father was about to shake an entire neighborhood. Ahead, water pressed against the dam like a restless army waiting for orders, and me, I was ready to give them. 2 nights before the storm, I heard it, a faint metallic clang echoing across the pasture. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, boots crunching gravel as I ran to the dam. There they were, 3 men in tactical vests, headlamps bobbing, trying to jam bags of quickset concrete into my spillway gears. "Stop!" I shouted. They froze, then bolted, but not fast enough. My trail cams had already captured every face. Within minutes, Deputy Rodriguez had them cuffed. Their excuse? Protecting the community. Their reality? Arrested for sabotaging federal infrastructure, Maggie. Showed up at the scene, hair disheveled, shrieking at the deputies, "You don't understand, he's dangerous! He's weaponizing water!" But for the first time, I saw cracks in her perfect mask. Fear. The next morning, I was summoned to a 6 a.m. emergency hearing. Judge Henry Walsh, golf buddy of Rick Thornwell, presided. Maggie sat smug at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 attorneys in $1,000 suits. They painted me as a troubled veteran, accused me of planning to flood families, demanded an immediate restraining order against me operating the dam. When my turn came, I didn't shout. I simply slid Pops's federal dam permits and the 1923 water rights deed across the table. And then, for good measure, I played a recording Henderson had secured. Rick Thornwell screaming into his phone, "Open that dam and my whole development loses value. We'll be ruined." The courtroom went silent. Judge Walsh paled. He knew obstruction of federal authority could drag him into investigation. He muttered something about insufficient grounds and dismissed the case. Maggie's smile cracked, like porcelain. By dawn the next day, black clouds rolled across the horizon. Wind whipped through cedar trees. Rain fell in thick sheets, hammering the tin roof of Pop's barn. The reservoir behind the dam swelled higher with every passing hour. Water thundered against steel gates, hungry to return to its creek. Neighbors gathered along fence lines, whispering. Reporters parked vans along the gravel road, cameras ready. EPA agents set up clipboards at my kitchen table, calm but watchful. And at the center of it all stood me, Pops's grandson, Army engineer, keeper of the dam. The world had painted me as villain. Today, they'd see the truth. At 7:02 a.m., the rain softened to a steady hush, the kind that soaks the ground rather than punishes it. The ridge to the west wore a veil of slate clouds. Willow leaves shivered in the wind. Behind me, the reservoir pressed against steel like a held breath. "Ready?" Tony asked, hood up, clipboard dry under a plastic sleeve. 2 EPA field agents stood with him, boots sunk a half-inch into the mud. Henderson had a fold-out table under a pop-up canopy with binders stacked like ammo. A local camera crew adjusted. A boom mic red tally light already on. Mrs. Chen stood beneath a transparent umbrella with 3 old photographs in a Ziploc. The creek, 1964. The creek, 1980. The creek, 2003. I rested my palm on the cool lever. Pops's handwriting echoed in my head. "Don't fight water. Give it a path." I pulled to 20%. The gates answered with a low, honest groan. Metal that had learned patience. Water rolled out, first a white lace, then a sheet, then the living sound you can feel in your ribs. It slid over spillway stone and sought its memory. 20 yards below, it found it. The dark scar of the old channel snaking toward the cottonwoods. Flow. "At 20%, holding at 90 cubic feet per second, Tony said, voice steady. The agents nodded. I added another 5%. The creek fattened, quickening, testing clay and stone, shouldering past decorative boulders the HOA had laid like museum props. The water shrugged them aside without anger, as if returning a misplaced chair. A cheer went up from the fence line. Not loud. Relief has its own register. Mrs. Chen pressed her photographs to the chain links. "Just like this," she said to no one and everyone. On the far slope, a semicircle of umbrellas clustered. Morning show host in a bright coat, cameraman knee-braced, the HOA's safety moms clutching signs. Protect our kids, eyes darting. Between the water and their phones. Center front, Maggie in tennis white beneath a shell-pink rain jacket, hair perfect despite the mist, smile lacquered. "Turn it off!" she shouted toward us, cupping her hands. "You're flooding our homes!" Tony raised his voice just enough. "Ma'am, the water is within the historical channel. We're monitoring. Stay behind the fence, please." I eased the lever to 30%. The creek reclaimed a bend behind 18 Sycamore Place, where lawn crews had carved the old meanders into a straight, photogenic postage stamp. The sod lifted like a rug, then settled as water braided across the lowland. No splashy drama, no brown avalanche, just the stubborn geometry of gravity. A white SUV skidded to a stop at the gravel turnout. Rick jumped out in a suit without a hat, rain dotting his shoulders. He made a beeline for the TV crew. "This is reckless endangerment," he barked into the mic. "This so-called veteran is... Councilman, could you address reports your company filed no floodplain risk to secure financing?" The reporter cut in, voice wary but steady. "We've received documents." Rick's eyes did a quick, dangerous thing. He swallowed. "Those questions are out of context," he said, then pivoted toward the fence to point at me like a stage director. My phone buzzed in my chest pocket. Samuel's message. Bank examiner watching the feed. Insurance counsel, too. Keep steady. Steady is what we did. The volunteer fire chief pinged our radio. "Downstream clear. No structures threatened. Your levels are respectful." I could hear the smile in his voice. By 8:11 a.m., the rain thickened again, and the reservoir rose a clean inch. I nudged the lever to 40%. The spillway sang low. The creek shouldered a faux stone, decorative stream behind 22 Sycamore, rolled it like cheap carpet, and slotted itself back into the depression old maps had traced like stitches. On cue, a convoy of 3 ready-mix trucks rounded the corner, slowing near the HOA entrance. I didn't breathe until I saw the logos. Thornwell Construction. They idled near the walking bridge above the channel that never should have existed. The first truck inched out, chute clanking as it swung. The driver aimed the spout toward the water. Tony's voice cut the air. "Do not dump! You're interfering with a federal inspection." The driver hesitated. The second truck's engine rattled louder. The first truck tipped its drum. Deputy Rodriguez stepped from behind the pillar like a curtain call. "Kill the drum," he said, one hand raised, the other on his radio. 2 more cruisers slipped in behind the convoy, lights revolving without sirens. The driver stared at the deputy's face, then at Tony's. The drum reversed with an angry clack. Cement does not argue with handcuffs. Men do. But not long. The safety moms started shouting again. Flood, danger, children, but their voices wavered as the water kept to its corridor, and the houses did not, in fact, float away. One kid in a Spider-Man raincoat peered around his mother and whispered, awed. It's a river. Historical cross-section matches 1978 survey. Within inches. One of the agents' eyes on her tablet. Textbook. I heard a thunk at my elbow and turned. Henderson had set a laminated page on the control box for me to see. Highlighted line big as a thumb. Operator shall maintain seasonal flow patterns in perpetuity to preserve downstream agricultural rights. I didn't need the reminder, but it felt like a hand on the shoulder. I took the lever to 50% for 12 minutes, then back to 35% as the reservoir responded. The system wanted moderation. We gave it that. Every move written down, every second filmed. Behind the umbrellas, Maggie's smile finally sloughed off. She jabbed her phone, barking into it with her free hand, knifing the air. A minute later, my radio crackled. Chief to Cole, we're getting calls from City Hall. Imminent hazard nonsense. Keep your logs tight. You're good. I thumbed the mic. Already tight. Then the moment I had been saving. A simple thing, not theatrical, that nevertheless moved the day. I raised the lever from 35% to 42% and held it. The water eased into the last artificial berm the HOA had poured to keep the decorative stream photogenic. It sighed, ate the berm a spoonful at a time, and rounded itself into the proper meander like a shoulder settling back into a socket. Flow. Stable, Tony said. On the far side, a man in a slicker knelt at his fence with both hands on the chain link, head bowed. I recognized him. Miguel, the downstream rancher. The camera found him and didn't look away. He dipped his fingers into the restored flow and wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. The story changed right there. You could feel it tilt. By 9:05 a.m., the talk show crew had shifted from danger veteran floods families to environment restored after illegal diversion. They're not villains. They're weather vanes. But wind is wind. The reporter approached our canopy again, rain darkening the edges of his notepad. Mr. Cole, is this a revenge move? I gestured to the laminated covenant. It's an obligation. Built into this dam 45 years ago. We've honored it every decade since. They diverted a creek. We undiverted it. Our homes damaged. Lawns are wet, Tony said, voice neutral. Decorative features, too. Structures are not threatened at current flow. We'll maintain flow within historical band for today's event. Councilman Thornwell? The reporter called, wheeling, but Rick had slipped away from the fence and into the SUV without a sound. A new set of vehicles arrived, state insurance investigators in raincoats, notepads tucked under their arms, the kind of people who say little and end careers. Samuel texted again, insurers pulling rider exclusions, loans in review, you just knocked the first domino. On the HOA side, panic ricocheted. A board member yelled into a phone, finger jammed into one ear against the rain. A second paced, face wet, not just with weather. A third took off her Protect Our Kids shirt, turned it inside out, and put it back on blank. Maggie climbed onto the black plastic base of a yard sign to elevate herself a few inches. Chin, high Rain-X pearls beating on her jacket. Listen to me, she shouted. This is terrorism. He is weaponizing a dam. The crowd had thinned and the cameras had moved. She was yelling at people who were no longer filming her. Then Henderson did something I didn't expect and will thank him for until I can't. He lifted his hand from under the canopy and called out, voice weathered, not loud but remarkably clear. My wife and I have lived on this creek 52 years. This is what it looked like when we bought here. This is what our documents promised us. This is what they stole on paper. Maggie turned toward him, mouth open for a counter. But the words died. You can argue with a veteran, you can smear a farmer, it's harder to shout down time. At 10:30 a.m., with flow at a calm 28% and the rain easing to a sift, our phones pinged. Emergency hearing noon, Judge Walsh again. If the board could not stop the water, it would try to stop the man. We arrived soaked and steady. The courtroom smelled like wet carpet and lemon cleaner. The gallery was full. Farmers with hands too big for suit jackets. HOA residents with a kind of dawning sobriety on their faces. Reporters scribbling. City staff pretending not to exist. Maggie's attorney opened with drone footage of muddy lawns. Your Honor, millions in damage, he began. Tony stood. Your Honor, flow remained within the historical channel. No structural damages are documented. We have continuous logs. Federal agents witnessed. Federal agents? The attorney said, misplacing a page on his lectern. Henderson did not bother with argument. He slid the covenant forward. The 1979 permit stamped with the Corps' crest, the 1923 deed, the inspection logs from last spring. He spoke for 3 minutes. No adjectives, only nouns and dates. Then Samuel stood with a thin folder. Your Honor, we've provided the State Insurance Commission copies of the development's risk attestations. They claim no floodplain. They claim no federal structures upstream. Both false. He laid down a copy of a loan rider with a neat square of highlighting. Opinion letters contingent on flood risk appraisals. It didn't look like anything if you didn't know what it was. The bank lawyers in the second row sat up an inch straighter. Judge Walsh removed his glasses and polished them for longer than glass can need. The courtroom waited. I see no legal basis to restrain the operator's action, he said finally, measured. Furthermore, interference with a federal inspection is unwise. A cough at the word. Motion denied. I strongly encourage the parties to negotiate in good faith on any future landscaping questions. He tapped his gavel as if the thing might break if he did it hard. He did not look at Rick in the third row, but he knew precisely where he sat. By afternoon, the rain exhausted itself and moved east to terrify some other town. We kept the gates at a respectful 18% until twilight, then down to 10%, then to the trickle the season allowed. The creek, restored, ran glassy beneath cottonwood shadows, behaving as if the whole day had been an idea and not an action. At 6:14 p.m., State Insurance issued a notice of investigation to Thornwell Construction. At 6:31, the bank suspended draws on the development's line. At 7:02, a county compliance officer, skeptical yesterday and professional today, emailed a stop work order over wetlands violations. The next morning, 2 HOA directors resigned for family reasons. By lunch, a petition to audit 5 years of HOA spending gained a majority of signatures. By supper, a property management company quietly removed lakefront from their listing language. That night, my mailbox held a single envelope, no stamp, just my name. Inside, an apology that never used the word sorry, and a page of numbers that equaled a bribe. I burned it in the sink, not because it was dangerous, but because it deserved a small, unremarkable end. We still had to live here. Storms pass. Paperwork remains. Henderson and I met under his carport with folding chairs and legal pads. Samuel brought coffee and a spreadsheet colored like a city map. We mapped the reforms: term limits for board members, open budgets, and independent ethics, committee with rotating seats and no golf buddies. We drafted a recall procedure that fit in 2 paragraphs, not 2 pages. The coalition that had once met in whispers met in the library's community room with the hum of an old air conditioner. People who had been afraid to make eye contact a month ago raised their hands, asked questions, offered to bake cookies for the next meeting. It was messy and ordinary and perfect. We proposed something bigger, a conservation trust to hold the creek's corridor in perpetuity. I would deed a slender ribbon of land along the channel to the trust. The trust would keep it public in the way that matters, not for barbecues and Bluetooth speakers, but for water and willows and dragonflies and the math of floods. Lily designed the logo on her tablet. 2 lines, 1 blue, 1 green, woven like fingers. She named it Pop's Promise. I told her it was better than any Latin phrase a lawyer could have minted. We took a vote at a meeting where no one yelled and 3 people cried and someone accidentally turned off the lights, and we just kept raising hands in the dark until the motion carried. When power leaves a person, it does not wave goodbye. It just isn't there the next time she reaches for it. Maggie tried another press hit. The anchor's eyebrows did more editorializing than his words. She hired a crisis PR firm. They told her to apologize and step down. She fired them and doubled down. The next morning, security footage showed her and 2 board loyalists sneaking to the creek with a plastic jug. The jug went into the water and poured out something the creek didn't ask for. The camera saw everything. So did a detective with a quiet pen. Charges were filed, not splashy ones, honest ones with elements and proofs. Trespass, attempted contamination, the kind of charges that don't trend, but stick. Rick resigned from the council to spend more time with family. The paper put the phrase in quotes, like they always do, when everyone knows what it means. An investigator from the AG's office asked to schedule interviews with 6 city staffers. Doors that had always opened for him did not, and the people behind them suddenly remembered policy manuals. I didn't gloat. I stacked lumber for a new fence and let the board feet count to 10. When neighbors asked me how I felt, I said, tired. It was true. We held the first creek day on a Saturday gentle as a soft hat. Kids with twine and stick rods learned catch and release from Miguel, who smiled with his whole face again. Mrs. Chen taught hand watering to 3 boys who had never seen a watering can that wasn't plastic. The diner brought kolaches in boxes that smelled like cinnamon and paper. Lily ran a table with a laminated poster. What is a floodplain? She taught 3 dads that 100-year flood doesn't mean once in a century. They nodded like they understood and then asked again, and she smiled and said it again a different way, and one of the dads later emailed me that he checked his own foundation's elevation against the base flood mark, and he felt less anxious for the first time in years. We posted the trust's bylaws on a corkboard with pushpins and sloppy lines of blue painter's tape. A kid traced the logo and drew Pops as a superhero with a valve for a shield. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. The bank quietly worked out a plan for the 35 houses. Flood insurance recalibrated to reality. Landscaping unfancied where the creek needed breath, easements recorded across back lots. It would cost them. It would not ruin them. Consequences should scale, not smash. We didn't call it forgiveness. We called it engineering. The day the trust paperwork recorded at the courthouse, Lily and I carried the old cedar bench from the barn to the knuckle of shade where the creek curves before the cottonwoods. We dug the legs a few inches into damp earth and let it settle. I set a brass plate with 2 screws and a screwdriver bit and handed Lily the driver. She pressed hard, tongue tucked in concentration, and the screws bit home. The plate read, "For Pops, who guarded water and neighbors." We sat in a quiet that wasn't silence, the kind made by leaves talking among themselves and water thinking out loud. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder. "You looked like a superhero when you pulled that." "Liver," she said. "Superheroes wear better boots," I said, "and they don't have to file as much." She laughed. It wasn't loud. Relief rarely is. I wrote Maggie a letter I never mailed. It said, "You could have been a neighbor. You chose a crown instead. It didn't fit. It never does. I don't know if I'll ever send it. Some sentences do their job just being written." A month later, the Corps asked if they could use our logs as a training example, how to manage a community event with precision and grace. They didn't say revenge. Bureaucracies avoid poetry, but they saw what they needed. Levers moved with care, not heat. We hung the certificate in the farmhouse hallway next to a photograph of Pops in a hat too big for his head, leaning against the truck tailgate. Squinting into sun, you can't see in the picture. Miguel's pond filled to the lip again. Mrs. Chen's beans climbed twine like they'd never stopped. The herons came back. They always do if you let them. Some evenings I walk the fence line, with a mug and the dog's 2 loud tags. Some mornings I run my hand along the control box just to feel the paint's cool. Not because I miss the lever's weight, God knows I don't, but because the steel is honest. It does what you tell it when you tell it carefully. People can, too, on the right day. I keep Pops's journal on the sill. The page I open most says only, "Opened a little, enough." There's a lot of math in that line. If you're watching this in your car, outside an HOA meeting, or in your bathroom hiding from the agenda, drop your city in the comments. Tell me what they find you for. A mailbox, a kid's chalk, a flag, a chicken. We read everyone. We can't open everyone's spillway, but we can hand you a laminated page and teach you how to hold it steady. Next week, I'll tell you about a mayor who thought a solar farm was a bargaining chip, until my neighbor turned out the lights at his wedding reception with a single breaker that was, inconveniently for him, legally hers. Water remembers the path that's true. So do people, eventually. Until then, sit on a bench if you can find one, and listen to something that doesn't need your permission to keep going. The week after the spillway release felt like stepping into a different world. Willow Creek, once reduced to a trickle, now flowed steady and strong, cutting its way through the earth exactly as nature intended. Farmers downstream celebrated like it was a holiday. Miguel called me every morning with updates about his fields. And Mrs. Chen brought me a basket of vegetables watered by the creek she thought had been lost forever. For them, it wasn't just water. It was life coming back. Meanwhile, the empire Maggie and Rick had built began collapsing piece by piece. The banks froze their construction loans. The EPA announced formal violations. News outlets that once painted me as a villain now ran split-screen footage of Maggie pouring mystery chemicals into the creek. Rick tried to resign quietly from the council, but subpoenas followed him home. Their voices, once so loud, were now drowned out by the sound of a creek returning to its path. Our community gathered in the library one evening. No lawyers, no cameras, just neighbors. Henderson pushed for an audit. Sapphira volunteered to chair it, and Samuel proposed strict term limits. Nobody shouted. Nobody stormed out. For the first time in years, people listened to each other. It was simple, but it felt like the beginning of something new. The first Creek Day proved it. Children painted signs. Miguel set up fishing lessons, and Lily explained floodplains like a young professor. No speeches, no politics, just laughter by the water. I stood under the oak tree Pops once leaned against, listening to the creek's soft rush, and thought, this is what winning feels like. Not revenge. Restoration. Months later, the farmhouse felt lighter, like years of dust had finally been swept away. The brass plate Lily had bolted to the cedar bench read, "For Pops, who guarded water and neighbors." Every time I sat there, I heard his voice in the creek song, steady, patient, reminding me that some legacies aren't built in courts, but in currents. Maggie filed for bankruptcy. Rick pled guilty to fraud. Their names became footnotes in legal records, but the land they tried to steal became something bigger. The Pops Promise Conservation Trust was signed into law. 10 feet of creekside protected forever, beyond the reach of HOAs and developers. Insurance companies lowered rates, wildlife returned, and neighbors who once glared at each other now shared coffee at kitchen tables. For me, the victory wasn't headlines or lawsuits. It was Lily's laughter echoing across the pasture, the sight of kids splashing in a creek instead of staring at fences, the quiet nods from neighbors who once doubted me. The creek was more than water now. It was proof that when people stand together, even the biggest lies wash away. And every Sunday I carry a mason jar of clear creek water to Pops's grave. I set it down, tap the headstone, and whisper, "It's flowing again, Pops, just like you promised." The HOA built mansions on stolen ground, but nature and truth took it all back. And as long as Willow Creek runs, so will our story.